Hi, everyone. Dr. Tim and Hillary for another session of Dr. Tim's Aquatics podcast. How you doing this morning, Hillary?
I am doing good. I'm looking forward to today's podcast. I feel like I'm probably going to learn quite a bit.
Great.
This is one that the listeners have requested in some form. So we are happy to oblige because I don't want to say the new way we're doing things because we always listen to your suggestions, but we are trying to take suggestions from you guys and we're going to be implementing those into our future podcasts. So if you're listening to this and you have something you would like to hear us talk about, please leave a comment, send us an email, send us a message on social media. Let us know.
Yes. And, or talk to us. We've been at a couple shows and lots more coming.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We got a reptile show this weekend.
And then Aquashella.
Yeah, Aquashella's in May.
Yep. We're almost, we're in May.
We're in May. Where's the time
Hello.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
End of May.
And we're off, folks. We're rolling. Anyway, we are going to go a little deeper, maybe, waist deep into the rabbit hole a little bit and talk about denitrification today, which at Reefapalooza 2 weeks ago, this couple came up in their service company and they were asking specifically on this topic because they're servicing a 5,000 gallon reef tank where the nitrates are in the hundreds of parts per million, and they wanted to know how they should reduce that nitrate. What's the alternatives besides making up a ton of seawater? And I know we've been getting some requests for that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And first, because where's the nitrate coming from? Which seems obvious, but we don't want to assume anything. So nitrate comes from the end product of nitrification. The ammonia that the fish excrete is converted to nitrite, and then the nitrite's converted to nitrate. And a little bit of data for every milligram of ammonia produced, that turns into 4.3 milligrams of nitrate. And how much ammonia is produced depends upon how much you feed and the protein content. Higher protein food produces more ammonia, which produces more nitrate. You can't stop the process. You don't want to stop the process. You don't want ammonia building up, so you're going to get nitrification producing nitrate. So how do you reduce it? Well, the easiest way is water changes, but if you've got a huge system, that may not be practical. There's also maybe local regulations, that you just can't put it down the drain. Maybe 10 gallon, 50 gallon, 100 gallon aquarium, you're fine doing a water change. But 5,000 gallons, 10,000 gallons. Can
I pause you?
Sure.
How would you know if you're not allowed to do this? Can they tell if you're putting large quantities of water back into the system? Going to send you a message on your bill?
I think they think they'd have to do a lot of investigation, and I think a sewage treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant, would be probably more concerned about the amount of salt you're putting in there.
Makes sense.
Because remember, as we've talked about, the freshwater nitrifiers don't do well in salt. But it all depends on the municipality. I don't think it's a real issue, but this talk was really designed for major public aquariums, and they definitely have issues because they're they're a point source discharge, and they have to have any permits to discharge their water because you're talking about hundreds of thousands of gallons and things like that. So this talk, what I'm talking about are the slides that I'm showing originally given to a public aquarium group. So, but for your home aquarium, you're fine.
Cool. All All right. Sorry.
No, it's fine. If you're thinking about it, I'm sure everybody's thinking about it. So you can be the voice of our listeners, which you always are. So, or you can assimilate. You can get the nitrate reduced by, not chemical or bacterial processes, but by green plants and algae using it. This is very common in freshwater aquariums, and more with salt tolerant plants. Figuring out how to use plants and using the nitrate as a nutrient to grow plants.
Would scrubbers fall into this category?
Yep, algae scrubbers. Yep, definitely. But you have to remember, algae scrubbers, Chetomorpha, all those types of things, the nitrate is being converted to plant material. It doesn't leave the aquarium until you harvest that plant material. Then you've removed the nitrate. It's just like if you're using, vodka dosing or some way to stimulate bacteria growth, and bacteria, as they multiply and grow, remove nitrate from the water, but you've got to get the bacteria out of the water to complete the process. And that's why a skimmer becomes really important, because it's automatic. You can do assimilation. These are all assimilation, where you're converting the nitrate into some type of living organism, bacteria, plants, algae. But with a skimmer, it removes the bacteria automatically. You don't have to worry about it. If you don't have a skimmer, you need to use a filter sock and then change that filter sock or a sponge that will become clogged up with the bacteria. But until you remove and clean that sponge, you really haven't completed the process. Assimilation in algae scrubbers, you need lighting, which, energy can be energy intensive. And also it can impart a brownish color to the water, which some people don't like. If you looked at one of my big koi pond, the water is not crystal clear. I let the leaves impart humic acids into that water, humic substances, because that reduces the chance of bacteria growth in the water column. And knock on wood, in 25 years of having my pond, I've never had a bacterial disease. And I've got about 30 little koi swimming around this year. They spawned last year and they're doing quite well. So the other way is to use bacteria, which is denitrification. And that involves multiple steps, every one of which is a bacteria. So you're taking the nitrate and converting it back to nitrite, and then to nitric acid, nitrous oxide, and finally nitrogen gas, N2, so it off gases. This is done anaerobically. So there's the chemical formula for those that are interested. And anaerobically means that low oxygen. Nitrification, which is an oxidation process, occurs in the presence of oxygen. So if your tank were completely devoid of oxygen, well, your fish and corals would be dead, but you couldn't do nitrification. Now, with heterotrophic denitrification, heterotrophic's the kind of bacteria that do this, you have to have an anaerobic or low oxygen environment. You can use different biomedia, just like we do with nitrification. The key to heterotrophic denitrification is you need some type of external organic carbon source. Heterotrophic bacteria, by definition, need a carbon source. So to do denitrification, you need low oxygen and you need to introduce some type of carbon. And there are aquarium companies that manufacture denitrification systems. And in all those systems, there's a liquid or a tablet or something that you periodically add, and that's the carbon source that you need for these bacteria. In bigger systems, we use methanol, glucose, sucrose, any type of it's one of the big costs is this organics substance. So you try to find what is a waste organic substance near the facility that you're doing the denitrification at, that you can get the organic substance cheap, because transportation costs add up. The bacteria, they're facultative, which means they can go both ways. They can operate aerobically or anaerobically. Generally, denitrification is not how they make the most efficient living, but they can definitely do that. Like our waste away bacteria. Our waste away bacteria are facultative heterotrophs, which means they mineralize, break down organics when there's oxygen present. If it's anaerobic environment, they'll switch to doing denitrification. As I think we've talked about many times, Hillary, bacteria are quite adaptable. We talked about them. They're primitive. They're simple. Humans can only live one way. Most bacteria can live multiple ways, which can be good and bad. And the species usually a Pseudomonas. And if you look at this process, it's right in the anaerobic. Anaerobic, the definition, maybe between 1 and 2 parts per million, or 0.5 to 2, not over 2 parts per million oxygen level. And so that means there's potential problems if you're trying to do denitrification on your home aquarium. And those problems lead to incomplete denitrification. And this even happens in big public aquariums where the process stops at the first step, nitrate being converted to nitrite, and you get a lot of nitrite buildup in the system. And there's people out there that want to say, don't worry about it in saltwater aquariums, that nitrite's not toxic. And that's true when the nitrite is low. But when nitrite is high, it can still be toxic. It can stunt growth. It can poison the nitrifying bacteria. So you don't want high nitrite in any of your systems. And it can go the wrong way. We want the nitrite to go to that nitrous oxide, but if the system isn't working correctly, you're going to start producing ammonia. So now you've got a mess on your hands. And also feeding the organic carbon, well, that's carbon dosing. So you're trying to feed the anaerobic bacteria inside your denitrification chamber, but you're also, there's no way you can avoid it, feeding the bacteria in the water column too. So there's a lot of problems associated with this that all have to be controlled. And you can get crashes in your oxygen level, you can get bacterial blooms, and you can get a buildup of sulfide when the oxygen goes anoxic. So there are lots of different ways this process can happen. What you're looking for is a smooth operation, and the biggest drawback is controlling the amount of oxygen in your water. You have to side stream it, which means take a little bit of your aquarium water, put it through a lot of tubing where the bacteria on the sides of the tubing are removing the oxygen until it gets to that low oxygen level and goes into the denitrification chamber. So that sounds like a lot of work, and it is for a home aquarist. And the different types of substances also can be a problem to get on, to get access to and use. And some of them are, let's face it, they're flammable too. So not the easiest process in the world. So the pros and cons. Now, the one nice thing about heterotrophic denitrification is that it adds back alkalinity. If you remember, when you're doing nitrification, you're consuming alkalinity because nitrification is adding hydrogen ions to the water. that's, the acid, the alkalinity, the buffering consumes that. And eventually the alkalinity runs out and your pH starts to drop. With denitrification, it's the opposite. You're adding hydroxyl ions back to the water and buffering that water. And so your pH doesn't drop. And you can achieve, and it's not the easiest process, but it can be done. It's just not something that you can start up and forget. But you can have a process where your pH never drops, which is, very nice. But it takes a long time to get going. And if you get a big, if you're not able to control the oxygen level and you get a surge of highly oxygenated water into the denitrification chamber, that can basically wipe out the entire process and you have to start over. So there's another way to do denitrification, and that's called chemotrophic. So nitrifiers are chemotrophic. There's also chemotrophic, which is a chemical process through a bacterial, through bacteria, just like the nitrifiers take ammonia, convert it to nitrite, or nitrite, convert it to nitrate. You can do bacterial denitrification using sulfur. This process can be actually much easier. Than heterotrophic denitrification. You have this anaerobic environment again, but it's a small chamber that's filled with sulfur granules. And there are companies out there. There was a company there at Palooza that was doing this or selling a system. And you side stream a little bit of water, so you're not having all the water go through the system. So it takes time if you have a lot of water to start seeing the nitrate drop. But the bacteria are consuming the sulfur granules and at the same time removing the nitrate from the water. If you're interested in the messy details, there's a chemical reaction up above on this slide. And so you've got bacteria that are chemoautotrophic, just like nitrifiers. And those species include Thiobacillus denitrificans. This process is not as efficient as denitrification in terms of how fast it works, but it is, in my opinion, for an aquarist, easier to set up. And the potential problems, though, because there's always issues, is, again, if you don't put the water through at the right rate, you'll get the nitrite building up. So too fast, the process won't work because it doesn't go aerobic. Too slow, and the nitrite builds up because it's gone anoxic, which is, again, toxic to fish, toxic to the bacteria. Also, the biggest issue with doing sulfur denitrification is that the water coming out of the reactor is at a pH of 6, which obviously is completely different than for if you're doing salt water, any type of saltwater system, which pH is, never really below 7.8 or so. Also, the water is basically devoid of oxygen at this time. What we recommend is the discharge water is run through calcium flakes, and that will increase the pH before it goes back into the aquarium. If you are looking or considering doing sulfur denitrification, you do not want to run the water that's coming out of the reactor directly back into the aquarium. You must run that water through some type of a contact chamber that's containing calcium or a mixture of calcium and activated carbon. And remember, I said heterotrophic denitrification produces alkalinity. Sulfur denitrification consumes alkalinity. So that's why also you want to run it through that calcium to try to get some buffering back into the water. So it's, this sort of denitrification does not provide any buffering ability whatsoever. So the pros and cons. Now the pros are this process can start really fast. Within a matter of a week or a couple of days. You only need sulfur, those sulfur granules in a chamber. You don't have to add any type of organic substance. What's going to happen is the sulfur granules are going to be consumed. Now, some on a big commercial scale, what they do is they take that chamber and they rotate it a little bit. And that's because you're going to see a buildup of bacterial biomass, and that sulfur granules become clogged. So you kind of have to shake that or twist it a little bit. You don't want the bed to be completely static so that you can flush out the bacterial biomass. And that's why once you have your discharge water, it should go over some type of fuzzy material, floss material, filter floss material to trap those bacteria, which you can remove from the system. Also, it can work in relatively high oxygen, as much as 1-2 milligrams per liter, and it's easy to set up. Now, the cons, as I mentioned, the water coming out of the system has got to go through a reactor because it is terrible aquarium water. The sulfur has to be replenished. Usually you'll have to open up your reactor, add some sulfur. That'll probably inhibit the process. You'll have to start over, but it starts back quick. And then you get the biofouling. Biofouling is the buildup of the bacteria in the sulfur granules that can start clogging. So that is a quick introduction to the two major types of denitrification using, bacteria in the aquarium system. And so, Hillary, I'm sure you've got lots of questions.
I do have a whole bunch of notes. So since you just recently talked about this and about how it needs to go over filter floss before it gets put back into the rest of the aquarium water or reincorporated, can you tell us a little bit about the space requirements for both of these different types of reactors and where they should be located in the sump? I'm trying to envision where I would put it in my sump, or like the average hobbyist, how it needs to be set up.
Well, with the sulfur reactor, they're not very big. It's a round column generally that's 4 inches in diameter and maybe only 18 inches tall. And you can hang that outside your sump and then have you want to probably have a separate small water pump that is taking water from your sump and pumping it through the sulfur reactor, and then a tube out of the reactor going into a contact chamber, which can be, some area of your sump that's full of the calcium chips or calcium flakes. So that doesn't take too much room. Any of these types of denitrification, I would say you'd really want an aquarium that's at least 200 or 300 gallons, what the economics of it. But, people are very good at do it yourself, and putting things into small places. So, and part of the fun of the hobby is experimenting and things like that. So I wouldn't say you couldn't do it in a smaller tank. It's just water changes could be cheaper and easier. For heterotrophic denitrification, you again can do it in a small, 4 to 6 inch diameter tube that's 1 or 2 feet, not one, but it's got to be at least 2 or 3 feet tall. So you can do it that way. And you have to have a port that you can open up and drop in the organic material. There used to be a couple of commercially available systems for hobbyists, but I haven't seen those in the last couple of years. It's not as simple, and you definitely want to have a separate pump for just your denitrifying filter, because you have to be able to control the flow. And when you're running this and setting it up, you want to be able to measure, grab a water sample on the discharge of your denitrifier so that you can make sure you're not producing nitrite. And don't worry if you see it in the beginning, you probably will as the bacteria start to establish. But over, 2-3 week period, and for the denitrifying filter, it could even take longer, 4 weeks, you eventually should start seeing water that comes out nitrate free, nitrite free. It should be really good water.
How often would you recommend testing that to see, waiting till you get to that point?
Every couple of days. Bacterial processes take time. It's just like when people use our one and only and they set everything up and 2 hours later, I didn't see the ammonia. Okay, it's not that fast, folks. So every 2 or 3 days. Don't freak out about that. But you definitely need to be measuring both nitrite and nitrate. Why? Well, remember, your nitrate test kit, that first chemical that you add is a reducing agent that is reducing the nitrate to nitrite. And then the test is measuring nitrite. Well, if you're not measuring nitrite at the same time, and your system is, stuck, like I talked about, both of these processes in the beginning will produce nitrite and can get stuck there. You're just measuring nitrate. You think everything's great because you're getting a reading, but that reading could be the nitrite. Does that make sense, Hillary?
Yeah.
So you got to measure nitrite, because the nitrite should be 0, and then your nitrate, say that's, in the beginning 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 20, whatever it is, that's the nitrate because your nitrite is 0. But you start the denitrification process and your nitrite is your nitrate is 20, and yet you go and measure nitrite and it's 10. Well, half that nitrate that you measured is coming from the nitrite that's in the water because the denitrification process isn't complete. Did I make that clear or muddy?
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. So you got to be measuring nitrite when you're doing denitrification and measuring nitrate, both of them. So
you should always be testing anyway. So
yeah,
just put this on your checklist.
Yeah. And it's a simple test. And it's really, as I've mentioned, we've talked about many times, it's kind of that canary in the coal mine. Your nitrite after your tank is established should basically always be 0. And if you start getting nitrite, that tells you something's going wrong in your aquarium and you need to check out and really investigate what's going on. Most cases, your water flow, your biofilter's clogged. So you're not getting good nitrification. And it's kind of the opposite with denitrification is you're probably pumping the water. Well, it can go either way. You're pumping the water too fast, so the process can't complete, or it's too slow and it's clogged up and it's gone anoxic and you're starting to produce that. And that brings up another thought. The key to making denitrification work in an aquarium system is the water flow. But if you go too low, you'll go from anaerobic to anoxic. And if your system if you have a saltwater system, and it can happen in fresh water too, though, and you automatically will have a lot of sulfate in that water because that's part of the makeup of salt water. When the system goes anoxic, the bacteria switch and they start taking the sulfate in the water and producing hydrogen sulfide. So if you're doing this process and you smell rotten eggs, even a whiff of rotten egg smell, that's hydrogen sulfide, that is the warning that your water flow through your denitrification filter is too low, or the system is clogged up and you need to clean it, get a little bit more water flow, do something, because you do not want a bunch of hydrogen sulfide going back into your aquarium, because it will kill your corals, it'll kill your fish, and it'll kill your nitrifying bacteria.
So I feel like we've touched on that, like in conversations, like when people have had power outages with canister filters, and to like close those and like dump them out. Would you recommend sealing it off from the system and then starting over, or just you think increasing the flow would be enough and wouldn't cause harm?
Well, it depends on what you mean by causing harm to whom, but what you should always have. That's why I say use the separate water pump, and you have a tube come out of your denitrifier, and you can take that tube, and instead of the water going back into your aquarium, you can collect it into, a bucket or something, and just take your water pump and increase the flow and kind of shake your denitrifying filter, because you're trying to loosen up all that biomass and get more flow to flush that biomass out of the system into the waste bucket. And sure, just you might lose, it isn't as if the bacteria are exposed to a little bit of oxygen for a minute or two, they're all going to die. They're not going to die. But you don't worry about that. They'll be fine. You don't want to run it through there for 4 hours or something like that. But a quick increased flow and some shaking of the media to flush out that biomass, and then turn your pump back down, and you should be fine. And that's almost a regular maintenance that you should do if running a denitrifier, like on a weekly basis. And also measure, when things are working, measure the water flow. How long does it take to fill up a cup, or literally a cup or 2 cups? Get a measuring cup out of the kitchen and time it. Okay, it took, the water flow, it took 2 minutes to fill up to 2 cups. When you start seeing things aren't going well, we'll measure that water flow. Now it's taking, 5 minutes, 6 minutes to get that same. That's telling you your system's clogged up, and that's when you need to clean it.
Okay, that makes sense.
These are not maintenance free. Nothing is maintenance free. And that brings up another point. You were asking where to put it. You should put this system after your mechanical filter. Anytime you're trying to do anything microbially, you should put it after your mechanical filter, because all the organics, the particulate organic material clogs up all the bacterial biomass, which you don't want.
This is probably not something that's for a beginning hobbyist, or not something that you would probably need on a new tank. This is for a fairly mature system. Am I correct in that?
Yes, this is not something for a brand new hobbyist. If you've got a big system, or you're caring for a big system, 500,000, 4,000 gallons, which sounds crazy, but I think you've talked to a lot of people, at these shows here. There's people that have some huge aquariums out there. Used to be 250 gallons was like, you've got a big aquarium. Now 250, everybody seems to have a 250 gallon aquarium. The pictures we see are like, dang, that's huge. 1,000 gallons is not, there's a lot of 1,000-gallon aquariums out there, folks, and 500-gallon aquariums, and that's a lot of water.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you have that type of system, and you're have a lot of fish in it, because I've got this big aquarium, I'm filling this thing up, and you're feeding a lot and producing a lot of nitrate, doing water changes is a lot of work and a lot of expense. And what do you do with that water and things like that? So that's a prime candidate for these types of systems. There is another way. I mean, this talk is on denitrification. There is, assimilation, which we briefly touched, using the biopellets, which is very efficient, or, the algae scrubbers. There's many, many ways to do this. None of them absolutely the correct way. It depends upon, as I've always said, with any filter, how much time do you have? Can you do the maintenance? Do you understand how to do the maintenance? Will you do the maintenance? Because if things become a kind of a pain in the rear, we put it off. There's no doubt about it. And
So much truth to that.
it's just human nature. Yeah, I'll get to it tomorrow. A month later, I haven't got to that. I'm not going to get to it. And when it comes to an aquarium, especially with marine aquarium, putting off the maintenance leads to disaster. So it's for bigger systems that have a lot of fish, systems that produce a lot of nitrate. These can be, economically save you time and money done right. And I don't want to paint it as difficult. It's just more. It has to be more or managed more than a nitrifying filter. Nitrifying filter, as long as the water's moving, it's got good oxygen, the bacteria are going to come and they're going to do their thing. Denitrifying, you're more on the edge of things, because if it does, you don't maintain it, it'll go anoxic and produce hydrogen sulfide, and you're just not going to be happy with that result.
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like especially if you're a beginner, not that you can't do it, but that there's a lot of other things that you can learn about taking care of an aquarium. And I mean, there is a lot to learn, a lot to observe, a lot to figure out, that put this in the next steps if you want to further your experience.
I would put in doing more of automated, adding trace elements and maintaining your pH and alkalinity, with calcium reactors before this, because that's more important. Nitrate, you definitely don't want to go zero or super low. People come up to us, and if they've got dinoflagellates, it's almost 98% plus that they've got no nitrate or very low nitrate in the water. So, and there's people that have absolutely gorgeous systems. There's public aquariums that are absolutely gorgeous where the nitrate is over 100. You don't really want it that high, but it is not the number one. And this is my personal experience and opinion. It is not the number one thing that you should be chasing. Stability is what marine organisms want. Stability in pH. If you're going with high corals, high population of corals, you need your calcium and your magnesium, your strontium, your trace elements, your lighting. There's plenty of things to spend your time and hard-earned money on, rather than putting together a denitrifying filter when you can basically just change water a lot easier.
That brings me to a question. How many people do you think have these kind of filters on their systems?
Nowadays, that would be an interesting. Can we run a poll?
Yeah, we can try.
You can try.
Okay, I can try. I will try.
I would say not that many. I bet you it's less than 10%, maybe even less than 5%.
And probably those are all on fairly large systems then.
Yeah, I know. I would. 15 years ago, it was definitely a lot more people. But then with biopellets, it's just so much easier to get rid of your nitrate using biopellets. Which I guess I'm leading into another topic that we should get into of how to use biopellets, because you can use that aerobically and anaerobically, but much easier to do nitrification removal. It's not denitrification using biopellets.
Sounds. Put that on the list for a future podcast.
Yeah. And actually, I kind of misspoke there, because if you do the biopellets in an anaerobic chamber, you will get denitrification, because the biopellets are that organic substance that you need to add. and it can be quite efficient. There's some big public aquariums that use biopellets for doing denitrification. But with as with everything, there's pros and cons, and that's for another day.
I like that. Sounds like a good place to end.
Yes. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. This has been an introduction to denitrification. Don't be scared of it, but just respect the bacteria. How's that?
That works.
All right, everyone. This is the month of May, right, Hillary? We're already into this.
Yeah, that's true. It's May the 4th be with you.
Yeah, May the 4th. And with that, folks, have a great day and good fish keeping. This has been Dr. Tim and Hillary with another Dr. Tim's Aquatics podcast.